this evening, and it has been a very beautiful day, and as we may have mentioned this morning, it is, by the way, the first day of spring, and it is very beautiful out there. This evening, we're really continuing on a series of those that made themselves enemies of Christ. And we've looked bit by bit at some things. One is that they're okay being hypocrites. They everything, so much that they did was hypocritical, of where they would say one thing and that's not the way they lived their life. And they would be found saying one thing in one place, another thing in another place, and have these expectations on others, but they themselves would not do them at all. But this evening, we're going to be looking at, here is a group that they hate both God and man. They truly do. And if we go to Matthew chapter 22, we just want to look at this. We begin in verse 34. Matthew 22, verse 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him and saying, now this is among the Pharisees, Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. The second, not to be diminished any, but there's a second one. We got to put that one in. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. And when Jesus says that, okay, they're not going to disagree with that. They're not going to disagree with that. They would understand, yeah, that would be legitimate. First is loving God with all of your being, everything. Next is love of mankind. And of course, you have Jesus describing when you have one man, not in this case, one man saying, and who is my neighbor? Well, Jesus then goes on to the parable of the Good Samaritan. But here is love of God and love of mankind. What is wrong with that? What is wrong with that? And the fact of the matter is, and it is true, if you have those that disdain God will find themselves disdaining mankind as well. Then there will be, obviously, they'll have friendships. Obviously, there'll be people that they do love. But for the grand majority of people on the earth, they would have no love for them at all. And of course, this would be from individual to individual. But the fact is that we find this among his enemies, that it is someone, and we'll see this, someone who will not believe God. They just won't do it. They refuse and they are disobedient to God. But here's the next part of it, is we find where there are those who not only do they not want to believe, they don't want others to believe either. They want to keep others away from God. I don't know if you've met someone like that, but I have, of where you're trying to have just a good conversation with someone, and it is someone who is, they're listening, and we're going over some things that are necessary for salvation, understanding some facts about God, understanding some facts about mankind, understanding things like this, and someone else come in and shuts it down. What are you talking about? Shut it down. Don't want that being discussed. This person doesn't have a freedom for their own mind? Is that what you're saying? That's what you're saying. That they do not have a right to hear the gospel. They don't have a right to be for their own salvation. That's what you're saying. So much for freedom of speech. You've shut that down. So much for keeping an open mind. You've shut that down. And the enemies of Christ, they didn't want an open mind at all. Not at all. Now, we go to, so we're in chapter 22. Just read that. Now let's go to chapter 23. Not very far away in all this. And we just go to verse 13. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Now we'll stop right there. That describes it. They consider themselves the doorkeeper. They consider themselves the ones that they don't want to go in, and they don't want anybody else going in either. They would want to stop everybody. And when it comes to the Pharisees and the Scribes, which this is who he's describing in all this, it's especially true concerning their fellow Jews, that they don't want to go into that kingdom of heaven, nor do they want any of their fellow Jews going there. They have decided they are the goalkeepers. They've decided they're the ones that are not going to allow this to go any further. Well, why don't you let people make that decision on their own? Because they seem like they can't. It seems like they can't just let people decide on their own, because the people may decide in a contrary way to what they want, which is refuse Jesus. Refuse Jesus. You accept him, that's the contrary way to them. Accept Jesus, that's saying that they, the scribes and the Pharisees, are wrong. And therefore, they are not going in, no way, and they're trying to keep everyone else from going in, which is an impossible task. You've just chosen to do something that truly is impossible. You can't keep people from believing and obeying Christ. You can't do it. Not when they want to, and providentially God will begin to do things. Providentially, things, and how many times did they try to shut down Jesus? Then after his crucifixion, resurrection, ascension, how many times and how many ways did they try to shut down the church? And some things we have written here in the book of Acts and beyond. We also have things that we know from history of how the enemies of God tried to destroy the church, tried to stop the church, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. Now, we continue on. So, in verse 13, we see there's no love for God and there's no love for mankind, because what you're saying is, I don't want the salvation of Christ, and I don't want you to have the salvation of Christ either. Don't you even speak his name. Don't even murmur these things. But we come down to verse 14, because it doesn't stop. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Yeah, here's a hypocrite. Devour widows' houses? What does that mean? That means they're taking advantage of the weak. They are oppressive people, going against the helpless. A love of mankind? I don't think so. This doesn't describe it. Therefore, you will receive greater condemnation. They are not righteous at all. They dress the part, but they've invented the dress. They have this kind of dress code that shows themselves to be the super righteous. Okay, you common people, yeah, you're trying your best, but here are the super righteous, the scribes and the Pharisees. Just look at the way they dress, and you can see that. And here, they will oppress people, and that's no problem for their conscience. And they also, for pretense, make long prayers, just to sound impressive. Now we come to verse 15, because it doesn't stop here. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Look at this. For you travel land and sea to win one proselyte, and when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. Now there's a love for mankind right there. There's a love for mankind. They would go out of their way to destroy somebody's life. Now they may not understand that at all, but that's what they're doing. That's precisely what they're doing. That this proselyte would have been better off not to have followed their teaching. Would have been better off never to have met them at all. Because they've been made twice the son of hell as the scribe or the Pharisee. Because their teaching leads a certain way. And here is something that people need to understand. A false doctrine, someone who presents a false doctrine, they may only take the false doctrine, that one teaching it, may only take the false doctrine to a certain point and no further. But logically, the false doctrine will go a lot further than that, of where others receiving that false doctrine will say, well, if A is true and B is true, then C is also true. And they will take it much further than the original teacher ever took it, which is exactly what Jesus is describing here, of where what they are teaching makes them a son of hell, but the one they are teaching takes it to a logical point further than where they would take it. But they're still following the doctrine of the Scribes and the Pharisees. That's what they're doing. Now, here, they will travel land and sea to do this. They will go far distances to do this. And they are taking their diseased doctrine with them. And it makes people worse than the way they were and worse than the Scribes and the Pharisees. That's what happens. There is obviously no love for God because his doctrine doesn't do that, never did do that. His doctrine never led to Phariseeism. It never led to hypocrisy of any sort. His doctrine leads to righteousness always. When it is followed, what is the result is righteousness. A better individual. Now, each person has his flaws and will make mistakes, yes. But someone who is consistently preaching one thing and has this self-righteousness better than youism, and then obviously devouring widows' houses and these long pretense of prayers, and you know this person cannot be sincere. And their doctrine leading to greater and greater wickedness. Well, what do you think? They have no love for mankind either. Let's go to John chapter 9 now. John chapter 9. Here we have really the Pharisees picking on a man who this would be the happiest time of his life. In John chapter 9, a blind man, a man who was born blind, receives his sight. And it becomes this ridiculous kind of court and questioning and inquisition of trying to figure out, okay, what's the deal here? And it's the Pharisees doing it. What is the deal here? We don't believe you were blind. Yes, I was. Okay, go get his parents. Parents say, that's our son. He was born blind. How he sees now, we don't know. But let's begin in verse 19. And they asked them, saying, is this your son, whom you say was born blind? How then does he now see? That's such a ridiculous question. That's such a ridiculous question. But it is baiting them. Where's your faith? How does he now see? That's baiting them. And it's a serious, serious thing. And they have to think very, very cautiously in this. Or at least they think they do, because they fear what's behind that question. They know their inquisitors are there. They know what their inquisitors are getting to. How does he now see? Verse 20, his parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but by what means he now sees we do not know, or who opened his eyes we do not know. He is of age, ask him, he will speak for himself. You've been talking to him already, why are we even here? We can vouch that, yeah, he was born blind. The rest, we're not going to say. Verse 22, his parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, That's the one who healed the man. He would be put out of the synagogue. Here we have this pressure, and it is a social pressure. They're going to throw you out of the synagogue. Okay? Maybe if they're doing that, maybe if the people in control of the synagogue are this wicked, maybe it's time to leave the synagogue. Maybe it's time to leave. If they're this wicked. Is it that important to play this kind of game? And yeah, it is. I understand it's a dangerous thing, because the questions they are asking is they want to see that no one speaks his name, or rather that Jesus, the name Jesus and the title of Christ are not put together, or that of Messiah are not put together. And they want to make sure everyone stays in lockstep. Keep everyone at the same sort of blocked point of where you are, if you are going to confess him, if you're going to say that that is the Christ, this is what we're going to do to you. We'll do it to a blind man and his parents. We'll do it to you too. Compassionate? Well, there's the compassion. Do they have a love for God? No. What about a love for mankind? No. Don't love them either. Have no love for a man who now a great miracle has occurred. He has been blind all his life. And now he can see. And we're going to quibble about what they say about the one who brought this about? And threaten them? Because that's exactly, they know they're being threatened. These questions aren't brought about in an honest inquiry, because they know very well that this just doesn't happen except by miracle. Everybody there knows that. And everybody there knows that Jesus of Nazareth has been performing miracles. They know that. They also know that he has a group of 12 men who have also been performing miracles. Now, which of the Pharisees have been doing that? Or which of the Scribes have been doing that? None of them. And they're shutting down, and they want to, this intimidation to keep people from thinking for themselves and coming to the conclusion for themselves, and certainly not voicing it, that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. You cannot say that whatsoever. I think they would have accepted any other answer. I think they would have accepted an answer. Truly, I think they would have. Let's just make something really absurd. That along came we'll call it a mouse. A small mouse came over and healed him of his blindness. I think they would have accepted that far better than to say that Jesus of Nazareth did, or to say that, I don't know, it was just kind of spontaneous thing. All of a sudden, I'm healed. Well, they would accept that. They would have accepted that one. Just not that Jesus did it. Not at all. And they have this disdain for God. Therefore, they have a disdain for every work that God does. And also a disdain for other people, that keeping people away from their own salvation, and in this case, denying that this man could have even been blind to begin with. Everybody's lying about this. Now, let's go to the book of 3 John. 3 John. We switch over from, we've been talking about the Pharisees and the Scribes and the Pharisees. Now, these would be people who never believed, or if they did, we don't know about it. Maybe later in time, some of the individuals did. We know that Paul was a Pharisee, and no doubt there would be others that would, and even among the Scribes, may very well have been converted and followed Christ don't really know so much of that. But here we're going into the church itself. And we're going well into the beginnings of the church, well into that first century. The church has been established, started in Jerusalem, and it spread precisely as Jesus said it would in Acts 1 and verse 10. Exactly the way he said it was going to happen. Let me make sure I've got that right. For some reason, I'm thinking it's verse 8 now. Not that it matters a whole lot, but we want to be... no, verse 8. In verse 8, it's spreading precisely as he said it was going to. It's going to start in Jerusalem. It's got to start somewhere. Then it's going to go in Judea and Samaria and to the uttermost parts of the world. That's what he said. And that's what we see happening. We see it happening in the book of Acts. But, we can just step back and say, okay, I'm not going to believe the book of Acts. Let's go look and see what historians have to say. And they would say the same thing. It started in Jerusalem. And then it spreads out of there. Now, here we have John writing. We just see this, the elder, to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. And he begins speaking about certain things. And we go to verse 9. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, he's a member of the church. He's a Christian. He's a member of the church. Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence among them, does not receive us. Here is a man who he wants preeminence. What does that mean? He's top dog. He wants to be over everything. He is the one that has decided. He is, let's just give him a title, he is Archbishop. Okay, it doesn't say that's what he called himself, but we'll just by way of illustration, he calls himself Archbishop. And he does not want anyone, he wants to filter. He wants to filter with those in this congregation. He wants to filter what they hear and what is presented to them. And he doesn't want them to have the truth, because the truth would have certain things about him in it, which is exactly what John is about to write. Well, John is writing it. He wants the preeminence. He won't receive us. He doesn't want to hear the truth. He's rejecting it. So, reject the truth of God, you're rejecting God. Reject God, what does that mean? It's disdainful against him. You're saying his words are not holy, which means he's not holy. You're saying that his words are imperfect, that you have a better way, which means he's imperfect and has been outdone by someone like Diotrephes. Diotrephes is somehow better than Christ, somehow better than God. And whether false teachers want to admit that or not, and really they don't want to have to admit that, but that's precisely what it comes down to. If you have found a better way than what is presented in the New Testament, one, you're calling God's plans a failure, and somehow you're more clever, somehow you are more knowing. How did that happen? That is, if you think that about yourself, it's time to really rein things in, because that's impossible. It's impossible that you could come up with a better doctrine than Christ, because you can't. Now with Diotrephes, Diotrephes will not talk to someone like John or anyone with him. Verse 10, therefore, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds, which is precisely what he doesn't want. Diotrephes doesn't want this being known. It's very much like Ahab talking about Micaiah, of where I don't like that man. He has nothing good to say about me. I don't like him at all. He's just one thing after another with him, one thing after another. Well, maybe if you did something right for a while, he might have something good to say about something you did. But if it's just evil upon evil, if it's murder and if it's theft and if it's idolatry, if it's an enforced idolatry, then what do you think? You think Jehovah God is going to have his prophet come around and commend you for it? Well, it didn't happen. We'll just say that. It didn't happen. And now Diotrephes, he doesn't want John there. Anyone who's going to have the truth, anyone who's going to be talking about to call to mind his deeds, which he does, he doesn't want that at all. He still wants that preeminence. He wants to be in charge of everything, and that would include anything. That'd be doctrine. That would be behavior. That'd be, as long as he's in power, he's good. And this is a couple of things here. Prating against us with malicious words. What does prating mean? It means speaking evil against somebody is what it does, what it means. In this, he's just his own little propaganda, his own lies that he's speaking against John and speaking against others who have the truth, because he doesn't want the truth to be known. Because once the truth is known, then everyone would come to a conclusion that Diotrephes has nothing. Diotrephes, the way he's been acting, is evil. The control that he's had is wrong. They would come to that conclusion and come to it pretty quick. But he prates against us with malicious words, and not content with that, he himself does not receive the brethren. He doesn't want to see them. He doesn't want the truth. He doesn't want it at all. And forbids those who wish to, putting them out of the church. So here, just like the Pharisees had been doing and others had been doing, but this is in the church now. He does not want the truth coming in. He's had his time there doing the things that he's been wanting to do. How many years has it taken for him to get in the position where he's in? Don't know. But he likes it. And he obviously is custom making the doctrine of Christ into something that he likes. And unfortunately, I have seen similar things in my life. Similar things of where someone has stepped beyond any authority they have and claimed authority. And they invent new sins, and they invent new ways, and they lord it over, exactly like Diotrephes has been doing, loving to have the preeminence. And they forbid brethren from talking to other brethren because the truth will be told. They don't want that. Diotrephes is of that sort, and he forbids anyone from talking to other brethren, forbidding others, or he'll toss them out of the church. Well, if Diotrephes can toss you out of the church, that's an awful lot of power. That power is only found in Christ. Christ is the only one that can do that. Yeah, we have a word for that. It's a word not found in the Bible. It's called excommunication. But if we were to take that sort of basic loose idea of excommunication, no human can do such a thing. A human can't put you in the church, and a human cannot take you out of the church. Nobody can, but Christ can. Christ can. And there's no playing politics with him. There is no influencing him. There is none of that. And there is no trying to charm him or to bribe him or somehow receive a greater favor from him. He won't do it. Now, we go back to Diotrephes. Here is a man in the church keeping the truth out of that congregation. And then we have this, verse 11, "Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good." Now, he's bringing this up right after talking about Diotrephes. Yeah, don't imitate him. Don't imitate anything like him. Imitate what is good. He who does good is of God, but he who does evil has not seen God. Is he still talking about Diotrephes? Well, Diotrephes is certainly in that group. Most certainly. And for a congregation, that would mean for someone who's in the church of Christ, he both hates the Christ and he hates the people that make up that church, that assembly. He hates them as well because he's separating them all, or trying to. He has separated himself from the truth, separated himself from Christ, and he wants to have no one else understand what Christ actually brings. And here, we can see that this is very well a principle or a departure that is going to be happening in time. Now, of course, this is the first century when John writes this. And already in the first century, we have people that want to have the preeminence. And it would be a little bit longer, and you're going to see this more and more in history of where there are going to be, yes, there'll be elders in congregations, but then you'll have one elder over those elders. And then you have that idea of a bishop and an archbishop and cardinal and pope, all that comes through time. None of it found in the Bible. And now that I've mentioned that, Roman Catholicism is not the only denomination that not only is not following Christ, but you can see despises his doctrine, because they have tossed so much out and thrown so much in that it's just this mishmash of things that are part hedonistic, part pagan, elements of the Bible, elements of righteousness, but mixed in with all this other stuff, and it's just a heap. But they're not the only ones doing that. And there are a lot of religious people, and when I'm talking this evening about the enemies of God, and we have been saying this, it's not just your atheists, because it wasn't atheists that put Jesus on the cross. One could say that perhaps Pilate was. Okay, that's fine. But Pilate wasn't plotting against him. It wasn't atheists that put him on the cross. It was religious leaders that did that. And we're not talking about just those that are proudly ungodly, but those that they have that pretense. For a pretense, they make long prayers, that they are hypocrites. They pretend to be followers of Christ when they have really nothing to do with him whatsoever. And as we made mention this morning, you have the shepherd leading his sheep, but the sheep can also be stolen or led astray by a false shepherd, led astray by a thief. And that thief has no good intentions for the sheep. None. He's not going to take care of the sheep, not going to help the sheep, and just being with that thief, there's nothing good that's going to come of it. Nothing at all. Now, we turn inward and thinking of to love God means that we share the same love that he has, at least growing in that, same love he has for mankind. And he does have a love for us. And growing in that of imitating what is good. Imitating Christ. Imitating the examples that have been given to us. And that first and greatest commandment is still the first and greatest commandment. That governs everything through time. Going from Adam and Eve, and in those days previous to the flood, all the way to the law of Moses, all the way to the law of Christ. It's the same. Love of God, love of neighbor. Love of God, love of mankind. That's to be there. And to love God truly is to also love the things that He loves, and hold dear the things that He holds dear. And that would be His Word, His righteousness, and also mankind, His creation. This evening is another day that is past. This evening is another day that has gone, and we're inching our way bit by bit to the day of judgment. And I just want to bring something out for a second. In Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 25, and this all comes from our study. We're not in chapter 10 yet, but our study of the book of Hebrews. Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some. And this is going to be in continuing our word study concerning the church. But exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Now, we are seeing the day approach, because seeing the day approaching is minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, year by year. The day is approaching. Now, there are no signs to see other than that clock is ticking. That's a sign. That's a sign that we are closer to the day of judgment. That's the only sign there is, that time passes. Now, when exactly is the day of judgment is an unknown, and it's unknowable. Even the angels have no idea. They will know probably seconds before we know. Probably. I can't prove that, but I just have an inkling. It's going to be, I don't think they're going to get much advance notice either. And it's going to occur. And we must ready ourselves. As we see the day approaching, we need to continue to ready ourselves and to help others in that. And we ask this evening, if you need to respond to the invitation, that you come as we stand and sing.